I feel like I want to talk about the business decisions and the PR, but the PR thing, they've done a horrendous job with, it seems, here.
Well, I don't know if it's a cultural thing at the company, but you're right. They could have acted more quickly in changing that policy, the surge pricing policy. Somehow it got picked up in social media. It went wild, and it hurt them.
There's a notion that this was sort of mathematic and algorithmic, but in fact, the first tweet recognized what was happening and said, to respond to this crisis, we've decided to help by raising prices.
Yeah, that's happened in New York a couple of years ago when this first surge pricing crisis reared its head. During Hurricane Sandy, they raised prices, and their excuse was that it brings more drivers into the area. Yes and no, but it also brings more profit into their pockets. And in a crisis, that's the last kind of message you want to communicate.
Is it fair for consumers? I mean, is there a message you could give to consumers saying, hey, this is how our business works. It works because we provide a profit incentive for the drivers, or is there no winning if that's the message?
I think Uber needs to be more sensitive and needs to be more attuned to how their operations and how their decisions impact their various publics. Now, keep in mind, they have a lot of different publics. They've got regulatory authorities and governments that can give them a license. They've got their consumers that use it. They've got their drivers. And I think they've got their investors. But that public, I think, has been taken care of. So they're in good stead there. So they have to look at each of these individually. Now, when they make a mistake or when something happens with them, and it gets picked up in the news media and in the social spheres, it can have effects. It can affect all of those different publics, and that's sort of where they need to be a little more closely. They need to watch it much more closely.
I do say I've got a little sympathy for them just because they are growing so dramatically all over the world, and they've got to be handling, for every crisis we find out about, they've got to be handling the 99 behind closed doors or getting it right. But these very public screw-ups are starting to sort of add up. There's not just surge pricing. There's a surge in screw-ups by Uber.
Well, it's funny. They have built. It's an incredible company. They're in 230 markets. They provide they've disrupted an entire industry. They provide a very useful service around the world. They're global, and they're And the question then is, I mean, in doing that, they've amassed a bunch of what I call reputation capital. They put it in the bank, and ultimately, though, that capital is going to disappear. I mean, we all thought Groupon and Andrew Mason were immune, and look what happened there. So they need to be very careful about their reputation.
I don't know if we all thought that, but let me, that aside, let's talk about what Uber had to say. They gave us a statement, and it says that, quote, surge pricing is algorithmic and responded automatically to the large increase in demand for Uber rides out of the CBD, the Central Business District. As soon as we became aware of the situation, we capped it, made all rides free for people leaving Sydney's CBD, and Uber's paying for those rides. Riders got charged surge pricing earlier. We will refund it. I mean, that seems like a reasonable response, except that it sounds like it wasn't only algorithmic. It sounds like because of their tweets, they knew the situation and kept it in place for a little while at least.
Look, Corey, I'm not there at Uber, so I can't. It's hard for me as an outsider to comment on what decisions they made and when. It would be nice if they didn't decide after something broke in the news media and they actually recognized that something's happening in Sydney, and maybe this is not a good time for us to institute surge pricing.
Is it possible there's a technological response that's appropriate, like deciding when to put in surge pricing on a human level, or dealing with a sudden spike without an algorithmic response?
It's funny, for a while when there were some issues with drivers, Uber had a canned response that they gave to every media outlet that inquired, and now I think it's more humanized. But no, it's not responsible to do that. There needs to be some human interaction, especially in a situation like this, and with what happened with Hurricane Sandy back 2 years ago.
Well, and I want to back up a little bit, too. I don't know if I should be giving them credit for, I know they've told us it was an algorithmic response, but that tweet it's very specifically referring to what was happening in the Central Business District in Sydney, and that was their decision to stay with that policy, a human decision to stay with it once an algorithm had already kicked in.
It's a question of judgment, and they truly believe that by raising the prices they'll bring more drivers in, and it's a positive. But I think they're going to rethink that now. I bet they do. I hope they do.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, they didn't in Hurricane Sandy. They didn't when the huge snowstorms hit New York last year. They didn't in the the storm of the second storm of the decade that we had here in the San Francisco Bay Area, Uber's headquarters last year. They had this huge storm last week, and yet they had quadruple fares on Uber as well. So it seems like this is the way they run the company, not an aberration from the way they run.
Yeah, right. The company is driven a lot by its investors, which is a whole other issue. And in fact, I'll tell you this. I mean, because Uber is as wonderful as it is, and as you know, it's got some of the most influential and investors from Benchmark and Google Ventures, and the list goes on, where Ashton Kutcher weighed in, and so they're immune to some degree, okay? But I think that if they continue on this track, at some point those investors are gonna make a change in the top there, because it's a cultural issue that needs to be addressed.